The church fathers do talk about these groups that call themselves Gnostics. But again, as far as their texts, they never call themselves Gnostics, and they never used the term Gnosticism. That was invented, I think, in the 17th century by conservative Christians, more as a derogatory term. But having said that, we have to understand that terms like Hinduism and Buddhism were created by Western scholars to create, again, as you said, sort of an umbrella over these foreign religions. So as far as we know, that's happened. So do you want me to tell you what Gnosticism is as far as I can tell? Or as people know, or you might say the talking points, Gnosticism was this ancient heresy that broke out from Christianity in the 2nd century. And I would say that the latest scholarship would say, no, that's a simplified way and pigeonholing some people you didn't like and people you had to destroy. So as far as I'll start with the origins of Gnosticism. And that, again, there's great debate with scholars. I think the mainstream scholars still think that the Gnostics came from Christianity in the 2nd century. As I mentioned, they're kind of keeping the same talking points as the church fathers. Other scholars have posited that they are much older, that they might have been breakaway Jews who just got tired of the temple culture, the Roman Empire, and so forth, and just sort of went on their own into far-off places to study mysticism and get in contact with higher powers. Some say that they were even older, that they come from a stream of Zoroastrianism, Egyptian lore, and so forth that might have melted together in places like Alexandria. I would say that, and I would agree, and I'll probably mention her more than once, but the new book by April DeConnick, The Gnostic New Age, really makes a good case that Gnosticism is much older because it was never really a religion. It's you might say it's a metaphysical orientation. It's something that's always been in the air, and we can talk about some of the strains of how it all joined up, although it did culminate probably in the 1st, 2nd century AD. But I like to talk about the 4, you might say, hallmarks of Gnosticism, and this really, I think, defines Gnosticism well, and then there's a few other things we can talk about. But the first hallmark is that basically we live in a simulated reality, bad software, as author Sam Criss called it. And I think, as you often call it in your show, a prison planet. Although some Gnostics were a little bit more positive than that. But at the end of the day, all Gnostics agree this is not our home. We do live in an illusion. Maybe the bars are gold. Maybe it's some sort of a surreal nightmare. It comes to it that we don't belong here and we are trapped here by these stellar wardens or cosmic ranchers or whatever you want to call them. And these entities, as many people know, were called the archons, which is Greek for rulers. And they were headed by the main archon, who is called the demiurge. And a lot of people make the mistake because they think demiurge is Greek for half maker, but it's actually Greek for public worker. And again, we can touch upon the demiurge if you want. But we were trapped in here and basically kept asleep. And why were we kept asleep? Because we housed something called a divine spark, as the Gnostics called it. It was sort of, it was a shard of the infinite that we shared with an alien god that was beyond all the stars. It was beyond reality. And this alien god had somehow, through some cosmic tragedy or some sort of self-awareness or some breakdown, had fallen apart, or part of his shards had come down here and become trapped in the chaos. And the demiurge and the archons that basically feed off of this and keep basically the universe fueled. So that's the second hallmark, is that we actually, again, are really part of this alien god or this supreme intelligence far away from the material domains. The third one is that we can awaken to our supernal origin, who we really are, because we don't belong in this world. The divine spark can ignite. And this is usually through the teachings of what they called an apostle of light or a Gnostic illuminator. In the Matrix, again, we can talk about Neo as the sleeping person, and he's, again, trapped in this world in some sort of existentialist angst. He's alienated. And you have Morpheus, who serves a part of the Gnostic illuminator. And the Gnostic illuminator basically sort of comes with either teachings or some sort of other stimulation. Sometimes it could be a spirit or a god that comes down and awakens us. But the Gnostics held many different illuminators in their different sects. For example, Jesus was one, Zoroaster, Mary Magdalene. They had a Luciferian goddess called Sophia, and even the Manichaeans, which was a missionary Gnostic sect, placed Buddha as that level, as an awakener. And this awakener could wake us up. Now, what happens when we wake up or take the red pill, as is the trope? Well, the Gnostics contended that then would come, this was part of the gnosis or divine knowledge, that as we waken up, we can start taking astral flights beyond the world and bypassing the heavenly realms ruled by the archons and start communing and communicating with this alien god and the forces behind it. And through our awakening, we would start to become divine and awakening, and eventually we would leave to the stars and join. Of course, the Gnostics weren't just sort of these, you might say, aloof mystics, as some scholars have called them. They were sort of Christian bodhisattvas. They felt that if they awakened, they needed to awaken others through these rituals, through these writings, and so forth. I think the Gospel of Philip, one of the Gnostic writings, says, "You saw Christ, you became Christ." We were meant to resurrect or awaken or become Buddhas while we were in the flesh through this process of gnosis. So in a nutshell, those are the 4 hallmarks of Gnosticism, and that is basically what Gnosticism is. Because the Gnostics were very, you might say, anarchists. They believed they splintered off into different groups who did their own thing, and they were spread out towards the Roman Empire. Then they evolved into an influence, for example, the Sufis, forms of Kabbalah, the Cathars, and a whole bunch of other groups. But you can always find those 4 hallmarks within them if you really look. And even in their rituals, for example, I talked about these rituals, these ecstatic rituals, the scholars have been scratching their head. Well, you had these Gnostics in Egypt who were practicing sex magic. You had these Gnostics in Rome who were doing, the Eucharist at churches. You had some who were dancing, some who were doing mystery religion acts and so forth. So what happens? Well, the Gnostics always adopted, you might say, the cultural context of what was around them. What they saw, if they saw something, they were going to use it, kind of like chaos magicians. They were the first chaos magicians. But the point is, what they were looking for was that experience of that astral flight to leave this world of the archons and make contact with the alien god. And whatever they could use around them and the kitchen sink, they were going to use it. If it didn't work, well, they'd try something else or find another group or move around. So that's why sometimes it's confusing to peg them down. Like I said, it's more of a metaphysical orientation, and they were never really an actual religion. They broke off in lodges and so forth. They kind of were chameleons who adopted, again, the cultures around them, and they were always pretty much under the radar.